Yes, you guessed it. Let's talk about my narcissistic dad. Kind of throwing you a curveball here. This is a little dark, but there's a point to it. So my father, who had narcissistic personality disorder, put me in the role as the dumb child. So this video is about recovering from the childhood trauma damage of having a parent who was profoundly selfish, manipulative, and made you feel invisible. Whether you call them a narcissist or emotionally immature or something else, it's actually the damage that matters most in our recovery. Not analyzing the parent so much, although that is like a crucial step that we all have to go through, like the way we kind of wake up to that. So the damage or the impact, if you prefer, in our present lives can look like issues like feeling like you could lose your job at any moment or feeling like you're always in trouble with someone somehow. And I'm listing some other common ways that the damage or the impact shows up here too. And it makes sense why we have those residual issues, given if you had a narcissistic parent who wasn't the healthy, safe home base that all children need, but they actually had significant problems of their character. Problems of character in a parent can look like a parent who is insanely entitled, a parent who is manipulative and weaponizes issues in the family or in your childhood or over basics usually, and a parent who is volatile or vindictive. And there are some other common unsafe character traits too, that we don't have to list all of them. And this is super important here. When their responsibility as a parent is to actually protect children from those dynamics that I just listed on the screen, that's what a healthy parent does, is protect their kids from issues and behaviors like that. But I also don't want to spend all of our time on the parent, because focusing on the damage or the impact is going to be more helpful to you than I think than focusing perpetually on the parent's diagnosis or their behaviors, but we do need to touch on them to explain the damage. Here is what I mean by that. Instead of only focusing on their behaviors, here are some questions for our work today, like as if this was a session. How do you take your power back? How do you not live in fear, not just about them, like with other people in your life? How do you protect your inner child from the impact of the parent's damaging behaviors? That means your lasting trigger reactions and your beliefs, like feeling like you're going to be fired when you're still actually employed and valued. How do you reclaim perception of yourself and others? And that word perception is a key to this video, so hold on to it. Let's pause here and summarize what we just discussed. Here is what we've established. 1, sometimes we get caught up in the diagnosis and the traits of a narcissistic parent too much. Education is crucial in healing, but it's like not going to be our whole recovery story. Focusing on the damage and the impact is actually the way out of the damage. And a damage doesn't always mean broken. In other words, think of like your triggers are the healing path onto something new, not just focusing on the abusive parent's crappy behaviors. And I'd love to hear from you right now about how any of those things apply to you. Leave a comment if you ever wondered what not living in fear of what other people think of you might actually look like. Remember, damage doesn't mean broken. What would it feel like if you trusted yourself in assessing who people really are and trusting yourself about who you are in that? And most importantly, what would it be like if we weren't so hypervigilant about what people thought about us related to that parent? Those questions I just asked you all involve perception. Here is the impact on a child's perception of having a parent like that. And I often say the deepest wound of childhood trauma is the damage done to a child's perception of themselves and others. Here are 3 simple categories to explore the damage to our perception. And again, think of how you see yourself and how you see others. And try to pay attention to the questions I list in this graphic. The first category is self-worth, perception of your value. Not knowing you have value and won't get fired. Another example is comparing yourself to others or being surprised that someone likes you or compliments you. Those all involve self-worth. Next is sense of self, perception of yourself as a person, doubting your emotions and your reactions, maybe despite being right about yourself or people or situation, feeling like you're free-floating and adapting other personalities in your life. Those all involve issues of sense of self. I'll list a video in the video description about the issues of sense of self. And the third category around this perception stuff is perception around intimacy, perception of our self-worth, perception of our sense of self and our motives, projecting onto others others that they don't maybe take you seriously, or projecting onto others that they don't see you or like you. So notice how with all of these issues that they all involve some fear rooted in hypervigilance. Yet while those questions that we've asked were about how we perceive what is happening in the present, how might any of those three categories, self-worth, sense of self, and intimacy, are possibly wrapped up in some hypervigilance from you and that leftover impact of having a narcissistic parent? Can you think of a specific example right now in your life about how any of those three things play out in your triggers? Can you maybe leave a comment about that and kind of share about it? This stuff is actually more common than you think. Hypervigilance fuels our perception problems. They play into each other, like in a subconscious kind of cycle of the damage from the narcissistic parent. Here's what I mean. Let's shift for a moment and talk about these three big ideas around perception in a way that, like, yes, you guessed it, let's talk about my narcissistic dad. Kind of throwing you a curveball here. This is a little dark, but there's a point to it. So my father, who had narcissistic personality disorder, put me in the role as the dumb child. And he created this family narrative that I wasn't bright, and he would remind me of that in our day-to-day lives, that I wasn't destined to have much success in life, and I should work with my hands, meaning I would be better off as a laborer because I was good at that kind of work. He did not mean work with my hands as a brain surgeon. I was the disappointment to him. That's the narrative, although over time, I kind of noticed he didn't actually really value anybody except himself, if you can kind of get your head around that. He was always the person who had the one-up on somebody else, also his son. Even with other people who were clearly above him, he had some kind of angle on everybody, if that makes sense, which was really kind of pathetic when you think about it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with someone working with their hands, but that wasn't who I was as a kid or a person. My father didn't know or care to know about my interest in music, some art things, or what I thought about or worried about. And I actually wasn't all that into doing things like working with my hands. But he did like, in my teenage years, I got a job as a landscaper because he could borrow money off his teenage son because he was an inappropriate mooching guy. And he was only interested in things that served him. Let me know in the comments if that feels familiar to you from a parent. So I know that I'm sharing a lot here, but there is the piece about supply for a narcissistic parent and not seeing who their child is. I wasn't smart enough for him for other fields of work, but as long as I could make some kind of living to his benefit, that's what that quote of work with your hands is about. And FYI, related in all of this in our culture of recovering from abusive parents, inevitably, there is some potato of a person in the comment section of my videos and other videos who might say to me, the author of this video, well, at least your father meant well, and he gave you some kind of advice for your well-being, and they're not seeing the entire clear picture, the obvious picture that I just gave, and they miss or actually don't really care about the damaging pieces in someone's story. If you know what I'm talking about, just drop a single potato emoji in the comments if you've heard potato speeches from potato peoples that miss your entire abuse story and want to give you some bizarre your parent is human kind of a thing. You just drop a potato emoji, no explanation is needed. So years later in therapy, like I know that this is long-winded, but there's a point. When my therapist back then encouraged me to start an undergraduate education, something my parents never encouraged, something also my father said wasn't for me, in that I struggled to write an entrance essay because in my core, I felt like I was an imposter. I'm supposed to work with my hands. I'm supposed to be the dumb one. I don't belong here in a university. That is the self-worth piece for me that I was talking about earlier. In addition, having a therapist encouraging me to go to school and believing in me felt wrong. I'm the dumb one, right? Why would I have the right to take up space in a university? That is the sense of self piece around perception. And additionally, while it felt like I should stay in my dumb role, I would often get triggered to criticism in relationships, and I would interpret basic innocent things from bosses or girlfriends or whoever, like, Patrick, it's Wednesday, it's not Thursday, as if a girlfriend said that to me, and I would interpret that as her telling me I was dumb. That's the example of intimacy projecting my father onto those other people in my life, like a girlfriend. That's the intimacy piece around perception. Who out there gets triggered to things like, what did you mean by that? She just simply said, hey, buddy, it's Wednesday and you're not dumb, but I took it as, hey, you're dumb. So there's a lot of leftover subconscious stuff from the narcissistic parent that gets in the way of our intimacy. What shifted everything for me was the work about what I'm about to talk about with you. The truth is, my father didn't know me in any way due to his need of being superior, and he thought he was giving me good advice when he was actually just abusing my perception of my abilities to the point that I had no sense of self. And long story short, that being said, I received a 4.0 in my first semester after nearly not graduating high school due to abuse at home. And I was really grateful for that therapist encouraging me to go, which is a lot like having a healthy parent believing in me. Very different from the message from my father. And additionally, you're watching this video right now after an undergraduate degree followed by a graduate degree in clinical psychology and eventually a private practice in childhood trauma, and then eventually to starting a YouTube channel on this stuff as a resource for childhood trauma survivors. But my question to you, I'm not trying to toot my own horn and all that, it'd be okay if I did, but what if I stayed in that town believing my father and continued with believing that landscaping was the best that I could do for myself for decades when that wasn't me? So it's important to not just focus on my father's behaviors. And let's recap here. When it comes to self-worth and sense of self and intimacy, remember that what I mentioned earlier about what to focus on, that your triggers are the healing path onto something new, not the abusive parent's crappy behaviors. Like me getting triggered to, like, what did you mean by that? Was telling the old story, which is going to be more productive and helpful than just me perpetually analyzing my dad. So before I talk about how to specifically work on these perception issues, what is something for you that you related into my story about my father? Give an example about those three things or something that your parents said, but I also want to hear from you about how you're not that. In the way, like, I went on to college and became who I needed to be, how might you have done the same in some way? Even better, what is your specific version of that? So much of our perception and our triggers are about who they said we were and how now we can kind of prove them wrong. So now that we understand the damage is the real focus and the way out is working through reclaiming our perception, how do we actually start to work on our perception issues? I'm going to give you 3 simple but powerful actions you can take right now with me that we'll do together, each one for those 3 areas about self-worth, sense of self, and reclaiming intimacy, which you can just think about as like, all 3 of those things just really mean to be more comfortable in your own skin, really. So how do we start this work? So I'm going to give you 3 powerful actions you can do right now, and these are really great starting points. And there's also fuller and deep dive inner child dialogues in a new workbook that I just finished writing that can lead you to more cathartic work. So here we go. These are shortened versions of the more in-depth exercises in the workbook I just kind of mentioned. But this is where right now we can start working on big basic concepts together. So let's start with self-worth, protecting your inner child. First, to begin reclaiming your self-worth, we're going to write a statement about protecting your inner child. What you do is you pick a memory or dynamic from childhood, like my father's saying about me working with my hands, that you have with that parent who is narcissistic. Hypothetically, like that Christmas when you were 8 and your mother made you stand up in front of the entire extended family while she berated you about why you didn't get any Christmas gifts that year over something basic like a bad grade. Or a dynamic if you can't remember things, but it's something in the present that your parent still does and still abandons you around. This is what I mean. A recent powerful, heartbreaking comment on my channel was from a new dad saying he found out his father, narcissistic father, went to a concert in his area without connecting with him, despite the son trying to get the father to meet his grandchild, who is now 3 and never visits him still. He was right down the street from him, but he kept it secret from him. Like he found out on Facebook or something like that. Take a minute and pause this video and write down something your parent did or still does that crushes your self-worth, like I mentioned earlier. Now that you've done that, I want you to speak up for your inner child. Write down one powerful sentence, speaking as your wise inner adult directly to that parent about that issue or dynamic. The statement is you stepping in front of your inner child while your parent is still trying to abuse you or get to you, like in your head or otherwise. And it's going to affect your issues of self-worth. That hypothetical Christmas example could sound like something like this. You set me up to feel like I deserve to be ridiculed over nothing and to anticipate it like I still do. I'm no longer letting you attack my inner child about her goodness. Or the new dad one in his heartbreaking realization might step in front of his inner child from his isolative, neglectful father and tell his father, I'm done chasing you only to have you send the message that I'm worthless. I'm protecting my inner child and my actual child from opportunities where you only abandon, confuse, and kill lovability and connection. Bye. Or in the case of me with my father, I might have said something at the time in my healing work, I'm protecting my inner child from your twisted way of relating to your son only by being superior. You don't know me, and I'm protecting my inner child from the doubt that you installed and benefited from. If you can, envision in your mind's eye when you're writing this out, and hold on to this because you're going to use this when you're triggered, that you're actually standing in between the narcissistic parent and your heart space, your inner child. You have the power because you know the damage better than the diagnosis to protect yourself and reclaim some of that perception around self-worth. The single sentence is the beginning of your inner adult stepping in to protect yourself, to protect your inner child, and it's the start of like a new empowered story. As a side note, maybe this is the most crucial point of the video. What are we protecting our inner child from? Are we protecting them from the parent's diagnosis that we tend to overly focus on? No, we're protecting the inner child from the residual beliefs that got dumped on us and they still run us, not so much about why the parent was unwell. And yes, I very much get that you might be still caught somehow with the parent in your life. And when you're triggered to issues around self-worth, like at work or with your partner, or when you feel left out, like that commenter, that's when you refer back to this sentence. After you write that sentence, I want you to notice the feeling that comes with it. Maybe drop something in the comments that represents that feeling to you. Maybe it's a shield, maybe it's a lion, maybe it's an animal, protective animal that you like, or even just a bicep. Let's acknowledge that feeling and stepping into our power, instead of feeling like that parent still has it all. The next action step is 2, which is rebuild a sense of self with your truth statement. Second, to rebuild a sense of self, we're going to write a truth statement. This is how we fight the abuse of perception head on. In context of 2 things. One is reclaiming your sense of self through real perception, and the other is dismantling who your narcissistic parent said you were. This is done in 2 parts. The first part is write out your narcissistic parent's narrative about who you are on a piece of paper. Like the narcissistic parent's narrative about that Christmas example would be, I had the right to let everyone at Christmas know that you got a C in math and you don't deserve presents because you made me look foolish. 2, on the back of that paper, write out your truth statement about your sense of self, and don't forget to dismantle the narcissistic parent's narrative in the first part. That would sound like, I was a normal, lovable kid who just got a C in math because you actually refused to help me. And then you ridiculed me publicly on a day about God's love. You don't know me, you still don't, but you did want to be superior to an 8-year-old and have an audience of people about that. For the new dad, that might sound like, I've always been someone to know. I, along with my own child, are what healthy fathers should cherish. And it's really their purpose in life to cherish their kids. You are a coward who chooses immediate gratification and emptiness versus being whole because you're broken. My own truth statement with my father might have sounded something like, I had gifts in childhood that led to gifts in adulthood, like all children do. You wouldn't have been able to tolerate a child having gifts or tolerate getting to know your son because you were broken. and not interested in fixing that. So now I want you to take a moment, pause the video, grab your piece of paper, and really try this. Don't just put it off. I really want you to kind of try this out. Imagine through writing your statement that you're telling your narcissistic parent the truth about that situation they put you in, the truth about who you were in it, and most importantly, what you know them to be now. Like just someone who is just sad and kind of broken. Because that's different than our perception of them then. Like they had all the power. Like that mother with the Christmas example had all the power to just shoot through her daughter or her son and just say that they were a bad kid when that wasn't true. What comes up about maybe doing that statement? Perhaps the most important piece of this video about moving on from a narcissistic parent's legacy is don't get caught up in your head to tell me that the truth is subjective, depending on who's talking. And what I mean by that is your inner child speaking from a lifetime of having your heart broken and being taught about yourself, that the truth kind of doesn't matter when that's not true. Abuse is not subjective. Facts are not subjective. You don't need to play devil's advocate with yourself for your abuser's sake or people who weren't there or people who didn't care, like the potatoes that I mentioned. Really, in this truth statement is you are dismantling their narrative and just simply telling the truth. So now let's move on to the third one, the final one, which is my favorite, the giving back game. We're going to take back our power with a simple exercise I call the give it back game. Our issues that we project, like with me about what did you mean by that? When someone just simply corrected me about the day of the week, I would become defensive and prickly. That's the intimacy stuff. That's the projection stuff. These are leftover issues that wreak havoc on our intimacy or the connection, if you like, with our partners and our friends, even ourselves. Again, they're about self-worth. They're about sense of self. They're about intimacy. They're about perception. And this one is simple. Their issues, the narcissistic parents' issues, their rage, our insecurity, those things were never yours to carry in the first place, nor did you have choice in any of that. So we need to give those things back because we didn't choose them and they were dumped onto us. For simplicity, let's say these things in context of the new father example with the apathetic father who doesn't visit. Here is the give back game. I'm giving back the constant questioning of myself and my value. That's yours, Dad. You can have it back now. I'm giving you back the anxiety and the fear about showing up for my own child. I'm not you, but I've always been hypervigilant about letting people down. That was about you, and you get to hold on to that now. I'm done with it. I'm giving back how I always assumed that people are not interested in me. My struggle with that is now your legacy as a shitty parent, as a father, and no longer my belief. But it is now your burden that your son believed about himself because of you. Now it's your turn. Can you pick 3 things that you're struggling with to give back? Pause the video, write on a separate piece of paper, and address your narcissistic parent directly, giving them back some issues that you're struggling with. That can be like that prior gentleman's one, like how I always assume that people are not interested in me, how I become defensive if people just ask me questions, that kind of stuff, and really envision them giving it back. If you get stuck, think of it like this. Things you wouldn't want any child to be stuck with as a result of a narcissistic parent dumping lifelong issues onto their children. You can also use the comments in this video to share and identify with your fellow survivors. These issues are sadly common, and we're going to see patterns to this in the comments for having grown up with parents like this. So there's this weird kind of creepy math in a way that if you have a certain parent, you're going to have some predictable problems with it. So let's recap everything that we have so far. We've worked on the clarity about the damage. We've learned that the diagnosis about the parent isn't as important. We've learned about damage to our perception, our thought and our own stories, how it plays out, like in that example with my narcissistic father. And the exercises were your inner adult stepping in to protect your inner child, your truth statement about what happened to your sense of self, and then the giving back game about how to stop projecting around intimacy and relating to people differently. Thank you for staying with me so far. Here are some of my final thoughts. Recovering from a narcissistic parent takes time. It takes time in processing the damage to our perception, our sense of self, self-worth, and our intimacy issues. You can start with your present stuck places and direct them back to that narcissistic parent. It is very empowering to give the issues back to them. And again, you didn't get to choose them. They were really forced onto you. They're forced onto kids in these families. And I hope the prompts that I've given you today are helpful in getting you to start reclaiming some power and really exploring the ways perception was damaged and how it can actually be healed. This video is actually a shortened video version of a chapter in a workbook that I've written that I mentioned earlier. The chapter is about how to recover from a narcissistic parent. The complete workbook and the complete chapter on the narcissistic parent is more extensive with more examples and more processing complete journal prompts. This chapter is actually one of 13 chapters covering to be what I believe to be the most prevalent issues that childhood trauma survivors struggle with. You can find the full list of chapters in this video descriptions along with some additional journal prompts about what we covered today on the narcissistic parent in the video description. If you're interested in working with the complete workbook, you can grab it right up here. It's a PDF form and just follow the bubble link right up here. So I hope that that was helpful to you. I would love to read your comments and your thoughts and your statements about things like the give it back game, your personal statement, or stepping in for your inner child in the comments if you're game to do that. Did you relate to something specific in this video? Was there a light bulb moment for you, which I would love to hear about because it helps me craft these videos better? Or if you have a question about the inner child dialogues or the exercises themselves. I would also love to know what was your takeaway specifically around perception about your own story. Like, how might perception issues still kind of play out for you in the moment? Like, even might you be worried about what people might think about you if you do leave your statement in a comment? That's like an example about what we're talking about. I wish you all well, and I thank you very much for staying with me and talking about this hard stuff. No, we're not in the same room together, but we're all in the same place, I think, and I'm grateful that at least we have YouTube to connect in some way, and I hope that this was a resource for you. So, okay. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. And may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.